So welcome aboard, Larry.
Oh, it's great to be here. We've had a series of continuously amazing conversations, so this will be just another one.
I know I really wanted to bring you on to What the Health, share you with our community of brain regen, courageous ones. And this whole concept of the effects of trauma on health and does it apply to you? I would love for you to start, like, what was your why? I mean, we see Navy SEAL in the title and in your biography, and how did you arrive to this state? Because it's so powerful.
It's also I would have never thought that I would end up here, right? Like at this place, thinking throughout my entire life, really, none of it really pointed towards being able to bring awareness to the effects of trauma to people, and even people with disease states to be able to help mitigate those effects. Like, I would have not thought this is where I would have been. My story started with Tom Cruise in third grade. I saw Top Gun and decided I was going to be a fighter pilot, and was focused on serving in the military my whole young life. Eventually found out about the SEALs and decided that was the path for me, and did that through going to the Naval Academy. So I went to the Naval Academy and got an engineering degree from the academy, and graduated and earned a spot to go into SEAL training in what would have been the fall of 2000. And then spent 10 years, graduated from training, spent 10 years leading combat operations in the Middle East and Southeast Asia as an officer in the SEAL teams. And I suffered a number of injuries and eventually had a career-ending injury that resulted in medical retirement in 2008. So 10 years of fighting, and then my whole purpose in life was kind of taken away with that surgeon scalpel, and had to reinvent my life and decided to go into entrepreneurship. So started building companies in what would have been the hospital room of Bethesda Naval Hospital in 2006, and have built and run a series of companies, generally in human performance. So increasing people's ability to perform in different domains, and ultimately spent a big chunk of time in working with corporate big companies, so big Fortune 500 companies, helping them optimize leadership, management, behavior of their teams, coordination of action. And so that was all of kind of the background. But what applies to this more importantly is my journey through both experiencing trauma in life, having then chosen a career that was extremely traumatizing, and then having to work through the healing process from that. And in that process of healing, I started to see patterns in both my trauma and the effects of that trauma in my life, as well as the other people that I had surrounded myself in this kind of healing community. And that led me to develop a process for helping individuals identify and resolve traumas in their life. And I was doing that in the mostly military space, so other military veterans, people that had experienced severe traumas in their life. And then on the other side of my life, I was running this company optimizing performance in big businesses. And what was weird was my process through helping people through trauma is done through language and linguistics. And I've started to recognize the same linguistic patterns in CEOs that had never experienced trauma in their life, but were experiencing limitations of performance, limitations of fulfillment in their life. And I made the leap that trauma was at the root of it, even though they hadn't experienced any traditional traumas. Started leveraging the process that I was using for combat veterans with executives, and we had insane results, like absolutely amazing results for both the executives and their companies. And so that was the start of TruePath, was really the melding of three worlds: my my own journey through healing, the processes that I'd identify with trauma, and then being in a space of working with high functioning individuals and high functioning teams.
Wow. So what is the percentage of those in the Navy that actually make it into the SEALs?
Just like fractions of 1%. Like just
Fractions. Yeah.
I can kind of give you raw numbers. So my SEAL training class, which is called the BUDS class, started with 135 guys that were culled from about 2,000 that applied.
Wow.
So you start with 2,000, you end up with about 130 guys in the class that started training. In the 6 months of basic training, we lost all but 11 of those 135.
Wow.
So you go from like 2,000 to 100, 150 to 15.
Wow.
10% of the class that starts out of the 1% that actually got a chance. And then through advanced training and all the other stuff to get to actually become a SEAL, we lost another 4 or 5. So about 7 of the original 135 actually made it through training.
Wow. So it's the elite of the elite. You take those skills, you take it into entrepreneurship, going for excellence. That is a straight, well, you can follow that, but then you start talking about trauma, and of course you think, okay, military vet, capital T trauma. There's this discussion about little t, capital T. You start putting together another totally disparate group that does not, quote unquote, have trauma, and you're seeing similar patterns as folks that have been through war.
It was the way that I do it, because it kind of give the audience of an understanding of how was I seeing these things. I fall on the autistic spectrum, and that caused a difficulty in my young life. A lot of my trauma comes from not being accepted by the group because of being different, right? The way that I both think and I associate with people is very different from the norm. And being different in the city of Pittsburgh, growing up in a small school, not very good. Mm-hmm. So I learned that I can't, because of my limitations, I don't know what someone's feeling. Like I can't sense that. But I relied on language to try and figure it out. So if I pay really, really close attention to people, I use that as like a safety mechanism to try and figure out what they're thinking, what they're going to do. Hmm. So I have this tuned ear for language. And what I noticed when I was dealing with people, both my trauma and others' traumas, as well as these executives, is that the exact words that they're using, right, very precise listening to the words that they're saying, are not in alignment with their intent, right? Their intent for what they're saying and their actual words are different. And it is in that gap that trauma exists, where we live in a false reality created by a trauma. And then we have to act in alignment with that, even though we don't want to. And that's where the suffering shows up.
So that's not what people typically think about when they hear either big T or little t trauma. That's a really interesting, astute observation on it. So for you, how did that show up?
It was, for me, I had to redefine my understanding of trauma. And I did that when I kind of jumped into it, because again, I've got traumatized people that need help, very clear reason, right? They went to war, sexual assault, cancer survivor, things like that. Then I had these executives that were thinking, speaking, and acting like a traumatized person, but they had no big traumas in their life. And so that was, for my pattern, my brain needs to figure out the pattern. I'm like, something's wrong here. So I dove into it. And we mix up traumatic experience, trauma, and traumatic environment. into one word. Like we'll use trauma to refer to all those things.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where we get lost in that if I suffer a traumatic experience and die in that traumatic experience, I actually don't have any trauma. So we usually associate trauma to the experience,
Right.
but if I have an experience and I die, no trauma. If I survive, well, now I have trauma. So trauma is a byproduct of survival, not the experience. And that
Mm.
is a huge mindset shift.
Yeah, that's very different, or it is a shift in our perceived. It wasn't the event, it was the event, but it's how then you're the untruth of today because the event is no longer happening. Or how do you really wrap yourself
Exactly.
around
So in this traumatic experience, I survive. As soon as I survive, my brain is designed to figure out what happened so that we can make sure that we survive again in the future. So trauma is not the experience. It's not even surviving the experience. It's the lesson that our subconscious learns
that? Mm.
in survival. So trauma is merely the lesson based on surviving an experience where my perception of control was taken away. And so in that trauma is only bad if the environment changes, right? So for example, making it real, in as a SEAL officer in combat, there were certain things that were true. It was true that at any point in time, everything could go bad. It was true that if things went bad, people's lives were at risk, like people would die. And it was true based on the fact that I was the officer, that it was my fault. Like if the inevitable went wrong and someone I cared about got hurt, that's all my fault. And so I had to live in a world where everything at all points in time have the potential to go horribly wrong, that every choice, every decision, every action has life-threatening consequences, and that anything going wrong was my fault, my responsibility. As a SEAL, that worked really well. Like I got awards and performed exceptionally well. All of my SEALs made it home because I lived in the world of everything's going to go to crap. Every decision is life-threatening and everything is my responsibility.
Mm.
If I then move with that truth into, say, a business negotiation where I want to create a partnership with someone, and I sit down with that initial mindset that this conversation is going to go to crap, all the bad things that could potentially happen,
Yeah.
I'm not going to do well in that conversation. And so I've taken the truth from combat and applied it in the environment of business. And because the truth of combat does not align with the environment of business, I create suffering in my life. That suffering and stress is post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
The stress caused by living in an untruth based on a shifting environment.
Then you apply that, you found a group of pretty big high performers and CEOs.
Yep.
Having the same experience as going through war, where your life and others' lives. I mean, that's one amazing
Yep.
amount of responsibility. And thank you very much for your service. And so making that leap here, like how do most people will not self-identify as having been traumatized or having had
Right.
trauma. So, what are some of the symptoms that people could look for of having experienced trauma and having suffering today?
The first thing to understand or to bring into mind is that all trauma, meaning all of these lessons that we use to stay safe in life, are created in an environment where we have lost the perception of control. So when we think of war, that's super easy to understand how, I don't control something.
Yeah.
You get cancer. I don't control if I live or die.
Yeah.
Sexual assault. loss of a loved one, being physically attacked, all of those kind of, as you would say, capital T traumas that everyone looks at like, oh, if you were viciously attacked and beaten up, you have experienced trauma. If you went to war, you've experienced trauma. The thing that ties all of those together is our perception of control is taken away. So where we make the connection is that anywhere in life where your perception of control is taken away, we are now in an environment where we are learning how to deal with that. And it's in those lessons that we create these trauma strategies, these strategies of survival. So every single person in life has experienced a time in their life where they feel like they don't control everything in their world. So by the nature of being a limited human being, as all human beings are limited, we will, by the nature of that, experience trauma. So everyone has experienced trauma based on the fact that at some point, their perception of control is taken away. And so that to me is the first piece of the foundational understanding of like, oh, it's okay. Now when we look at executives, if any of you out there are entrepreneurs, senior executives, you realize like you spend your life without having control, right? You don't control the market, you don't control your customers, you don't control your team members. All of those things are the conducive nature of living in a state of trauma, of not being in control. And so with that opening, like, oh, where in my life have I experienced this perception of control being taken away? All of us can identify with those.
Yeah, it's massive. You know, when you look at the ACE scores, the adverse childhood experiences, that shows no one gets out of here alive, that we all have experienced trauma. It's just that we're not identifying as if there was an event, or it affects people differently as well. So maybe in that level of suffering, how do you get in on that continuum as far as, is it an issue for you or not? What I'm hearing you say is, well, no, it's an issue, and because it's in your subconscious, unconscious, it's running a program, whether you know it or not.
And that's where, it leads to, okay, well, how would I know if I am living in a state of untruth? Because living in trauma is living in untruth, right? Something bad happened to me. I learned how to deal with it. I'm now using that today when I don't need to. Right? Living in an untruth. It was true back when the trauma happened. It's no longer true. So how do we know? And what I've found, there's 3 big indicators is what I've found. One of them is this feeling like I'm just not quite where I need to be. Like I need to learn a little more, change something, get a different coach, maybe if I'm mentored, maybe if I start meditating, this like thing that if I just had one little more thing, I would actually be able to perform, to live, to do what I should be doing. That's the first one. The second one is this feeling of lack of fulfillment. So most of us, if we look at where we are today, we go back 10 years, sit where we were 10 years ago and look at where we are today, the person 10 years ago would be impressed. Like, wow, we've produced some accomplishments, some success, yet we live in this lack of fulfillment, even though we have objectively produced these good accomplishments. And so that's the second one, that lack of fulfillment. And the third one is, at the very root, all of our strategies of trauma lead to disconnection. And disconnection, we think, is safety, right? If I put a buffer between me and others, I won't be hurt. If I separate emotionally from the world, where the world can't impact me, I'll be safe. If I don't really look at my true self, my true nature, if I kind of put on some false identities, or if I pick other ways to be, I'll be safe. And so lack of connection in our world is the biggest driver of issues in trauma. And so if you live in a world where, like, you don't have all of the connection. You don't experience the love that you want to experience, the ability to share that with other people, having them actually experience the love you want them to have. That's a sign. If you feel like I've done some stuff, but I'm still not there, I'm not fulfilled, I have to go do this, that, or the other thing to get there. Or in the first sense of, if you feel like no matter what I do, I don't quite get to where I'm performing, where I want to perform in life. Those are the big buckets that I've seen for most people.
Those are massive, and they drive a lot of quote unquote success, but at the expense of the individual achieving them, right?
Oh, you nailed it, right? Like that's part of the way that traumas get really sticky is we get treats for having them. I call them trauma treats. Like my strategies, the world will reinforce as good, even though it causes suffering in my life. And so we hold on to them. It's our subconscious self-defense, that if we can have the me believe that thing that is limiting me is actually driving my success, well, I'll never let go of it. And so we get to stay safe by not having to change and grow.
Ooh, that's a massive, massive trap. So if folks listening, and in particular, how we got here onto the podcast was really talking, I've got a working hypothesis around neurodegeneration and unresolved traumas. And we're putting together a beta test. So if you all listening are interested, put yes, please down in the comments here, and we will reach out to you, and kind of raise your hand as far as you're interested. It's not a commitment to anything. It will get us into that conversation, because I see it as a massive component to dis-ease, dis-apostrophe ease. And it is really, the elephant in the room is trauma. A lot of people are talking about it around psychedelics and other components. It's finally kind of coming of age, but we're still not really sure what to do with it. And this is not the Woody Allen movie, sit on the couch and retell your life story and relive the trauma. So what kind of results could somebody expect to get from like getting the courage up to, let's say, look under the hood, so to speak?
A couple pieces there that you bring up that are important. The first piece is, what are we treating? And so most processes, therapies, experiences that are used to mitigate trauma are used to mitigate the emotional charge of the traumatic experience. So what I mean by that is psychedelics, talk therapy, EMDR, all of these processes are amazing for removing the emotional charge of the experience. What does that look like? When I think about the firefight, I no longer get excited. I no longer get scared. I no longer have the emotions that flare up when I think about that experience. Now, that helps somewhat, but ultimately what's causing the stress in our life is not the emotional charge of the experience. It's the behavior that comes from what I learned in surviving the experience. So a lot of people that do these therapies walk through the fire of having to go into these experiences over and over again to try to get to a point where they no longer are emotionally connected to them. And then at the end, their life doesn't change that much. Like when they think about their traumas, it feels better, but their behaviors don't change, because as I identified, it isn't the experience that's causing my life to suck. It's the untruths and the behaviors that came from the experience. So that is a huge distinction. What we are doing, and I haven't seen this much in the space, like this isn't very common to find, is we don't care about the experience. We don't spend any time talking about the experience. What we do is attack the strategies that you came forward from the experience with that no longer work for you. So what I love about this is all of the work I did, it was painful and often traumatizing, worse to have to talk about all the bad things. And so in building this, you don't have to talk about the bad things because we're not dealing with the emotional charge, we're dealing with the strategies. So that to me is a big shift in process. Like, what are we trying to do?
And so how does somebody, what do they feel like after going through the process? Because, you're not de-emphasizing or uncharging the event, but because that suffering that shows up in their life is maybe the separation or the feeling of disconnect or isolation alone. We see this oftentimes with folks that are big in the public eye, and the suicide happens, and it's like, how they had everything, how could they do that? And it's really as a result of they have
these
been
traumas and strategies, right?
Yeah.
Think about it from this perspective. If I suffered this horrible experience, and this is the other thing, doesn't even have to be horrible, right? So at 5 years old, I could suffer the experience of my dad shooting my mom in front of me. Horrible experience, big trauma. Or I could suffer my dad coming home. I'd painted a painting for him. He had a bad day at work, so he yelled at me because I spilled the paint and did not acknowledge my painting. And then 5 minutes later, he came back saying, "Hey, son, I'm sorry. Thank you for the painting." No one would look at that experience as being traumatic. But if in that moment, to survive this person that I did all this work for, who keeps me safe, completely saying I had no worth, to survive that, I just live in the truth that I have no worth, right? That could click at 5 years old. And then now throughout the rest of my life, I have to live in a world where I don't have any worth, because that taught me that in 5 years old, even though it wasn't a huge experience. If I get to be a famous superstar someday, and the whole world is telling me that I have massive worth, yet I know that I can't, because I learned that when I was 5 years old, I have this massive disconnection, right? The world tells me I have all this value and worth and everyone loves me. I know I don't. So I don't experience or accept any of that love, any of that acknowledgement. I live in this massive disconnection where I lose sense of self. I lose feelings of connection with others. I lose feelings of connection with God or the universe or all that's greater than me. In that absolute loneliness, my only solution to stop that pain, where the world's constantly telling me you have value and I know I don't have value, is suicide.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where we get into, where we have these truths that we live to, these rules. Our world doesn't match with it. We don't have this alignment or this connection. And in that is suffering. Anywhere that we have disconnection between what I hold to be true and what's true in my world, anytime we have disconnection between what my subconscious needs for safety, my conscious needs for joy and fulfillment, anytime we have separation between our environment, our internal view, our emotional view, anywhere we have disconnection is suffering. And so that's what we're resolving. We want to bring alignment between our conscious, our subconscious, our higher consciousness. We want to bring alignment between our world and our worldview. We want to bring alignment between my words and my actions and my intention. In doing that, we create, one, we're going to perform better, right? Because we're not acting in rules that are no longer useful. Two, we're going to feel fulfillment because we're actually able to produce results and accept the value that comes from producing that result. But most importantly, this unbelievable feeling of connection to self, to others, to all that's greater than us. And if trauma is disconnection, love is connection, right? So where there is love, absolute feeling of connection to self, to others, to all that's greater than us, trauma can't live. Anywhere there is trauma, fear, untruth, love can't take root. And so like I get excited about it is, what do they get? you get to actually experience the infinite, non-judgmental love that exists for you in every moment of the day, with yourself, with others, and with all that's greater than you.
Oh, so aligned with that of making heaven, earth, even faster than we ever dreamed possible. This is really profound, profound work. And I love how you took the apparatus of Larry Yatch, and it's like, I'm meticulous with language because it's how I stay safe and understand and interpret the world.
Right.
And have brought forth this amazing gift for everybody. I'm very excited to share this with the community, why I wanted to have you out here on this platform too, and do some of these cohorts with our folks with the Parkinson's diagnosis in particular. Will you talk about the CEOs, like really how you put this together? You were, with your previous incarnations in the business world, you were fixing companies that were not going well. You'd get them going, and then they would start to tank, and that's how you connected the dots here. Do I have that right?
You got it just right. And I was working, I had all of these a big company built on consulting, and we had reverse engineered the gap between civilian organizations and high performing organizations like the SEALs. And because I had the experience of both, like got to be a SEAL, and then I went into business. And in business, I built a civilian company that did not work very well, which blew me away. Like, wait a minute, this shouldn't be the case. And in doing that, I started to identify, like, oh, how civilians look at the world, life, leadership, all of that stuff is so different than how we as SEALs did. And so reverse engineered that and was deploying that in big organizations, and it worked. Like, it worked extremely well. So we would have these companies where we fixed everything inside, and they'd start taking off. And then all of a sudden they would completely either plateau, or actually usually they go way down. There'd be this big dip, and it didn't structurally make any sense. And I always led it back. They always led back when you kind of research, where did this come from? Bad decisions on the CEO, and decisions that made no sense. Like, they shouldn't have made those decisions. And that was where I started to see, oh, they're about to get into the penthouse of everything they've ever wanted. A company that works, ease in leading that company, big impact on the world. They're going to have it all. And their subconscious patterns can't have that, because say they live in the world of, I don't have worth, or I don't deserve to be happy, or connection and love is dangerous. Like, all of these lies. If I get to the penthouse, those lies don't work anymore. And so we have to self-sabotage. And so we see that in people all the time, where they build what they want, they get really close to it, and then they sabotage it.
Yeah.
So that they can stay in what is safe, but unfulfilled, unhappy, not the world they want. They consciously want, but their subconscious gets them to stay safe.
Yeah, those self-sabotaging behaviors could be a tell that they're working out of their untruths from a trauma event.
And a lot of people, I mean, if you've been in a world where you have a lot of these ups and downs, where you like build and everything's good, and then, oh, it seems to go bad. But then you have no problem building again, and then it goes bad. That's another good sign of traumas leading your life, because as soon as we start to create the life, the job, the relationship that we've always wanted, the untruths that keep us safe tell us we aren't allowed to have those things. And so we do something to screw it up.
Man, it is so powerful, the power of the mind and those unconscious, subconscious patterns that are kind of programs running the show beneath the surface. It really brings a lot of neuroscience to light. We've been doing a lot with intentions and meditation, and I really feel that adding this aspect of folks uncovering. So your process helps people uncover their untruths.
Exactly. And that's where it's very complementary, right? So if I'm using meditation and mindfulness to get present in the moment. And in this present moment, I experience love, connection, and the ability to make good choices. If we have subconscious patterns that are keeping us in the past of when this bad thing happened to me, or into the fear of the future of it happening again, it's pulling us out of our presence that we just built through our mindfulness. And then we make a bad choice based on something that happened in the past or something that I'm worried about in the future. And then we create stress in our life, which then requires us to do even more work in trying to become present, right? So to me, think of this as a supporting character to allowing presence in your life all the time, right? The meditation mindfulness gets you here. But unless we make sure that we don't have these subconscious rules pulling us off center again, we're going to have this constant kind of swaying back and forth. And so our job is to help you identify what untruths lead to behaviors in your life that don't serve you, and then reprogram those very systematically through language.
Whew. Awesome. I am excited for this, Larry Yatch. Any last words or wisdom for our listeners and viewers out there?
Oh, let me think. The thing that amazes me, I'd say more than anything else, is no matter how bad of a situation you're in right now, how bad of a mindset or how bad of an emotional state, that suffering comes from a perceived disconnection from source, God, the universe, from others, from ourselves. It is impossible to be disconnected, but because we have been given free will, we can create the lie that we are isolated from ourselves, from others, from all that's greater than us. What's amazing about that is, one, we do all the crap that we experience in life is on us, like we create it. But that's the bad side. The good side is you are literally a second away from experiencing all that you've wanted to. It is because it is in our power to create it, is in our power to end it. And so that to me is one of the important messages, that regardless of how bad it feels, you are very close with the right guidance, with the right guides, with the right plan, with some self-regulation, with some courage to choose to try. You are, with those things, you're very, very close to being where you want to be.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much. That is so aligned with what we do here at Energy for Life Centers. You all give us a thumbs up, get out there, give us a 5-star review, and share what you're taking out of this conversation, because this is how the world changes, and it changes very rapidly. If you're interested in the program that we're piloting, give us a thumbs up or comment down below, and we will reach out. Larry Yatch, thank you so much for this gift, and the future is so, so bright.
I agree. And if anyone wants to connect with me or my team or anything like that, truepathmastery.com is the website, and there's right at the very top is a contact us, and that goes straight to my EA. So I'd love to be a support to anyone out there.
And we're going to put all of the contact info in the show notes as well. Thank you so much.